Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're very excited to welcome Marissa Louise, who is going to be leading the Introduction to Digital Coloring workshop. I just have a couple of housekeeping items before I turn it over to her. First, a little about Siren Nation. This is part of our Siren Nation Speaks series, and Siren Nation is a nonprofit organization based in Portland, Oregon. Our mission is to promote women and non-binary artists, especially in Oregon, to create community and to inspire and empower others to create art. We would like to thank the Regional Arts and Culture Council, also based here in Portland, for supporting Siren Nation Speaks with a grant in 2021. If you'd like to learn more about our programming, volunteer opportunities, or donating, you can visit us at sirennation.org. So with that, I will stop my screen share. And I think that Marissa had a couple of questions so that we kind of can gauge people's interest and experience level and knowledge level before she gets started. So if everyone could, we have two questions. And if the answer is, I think Marissa, if the answer is no, they can put it, they should put it in the chat or raise their hand, right? But if the answer is yes, then they don't have to say anything.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so those of you who are online, have you made a comic book or contributed to a comic book? If the answer is no, you can put it in the chat or raise your hand. Okay, so Marissa, we have a number of people who have not. We have some people who have made comics, but a number who have not.
Yeah. Okay.
That might also help answer the next question, although even if you haven't made a comic, you might answer yes to this. Are you familiar with, one person says webcomics, yes, book, no. Are you familiar with RGB and CMYK color? Getting a lot of yeses,
yes.
Vaguely or a little bit.
Interesting.
No. So I think that's probably a good thing to touch on as well.
I'm suspicious of all these yeses. I believe you people. But there's something in the CMYK versus RGB that's called gamut. Especially when people make work digitally, that's one of the things they tend to not have an opportunity to familiarize themselves with. So I will definitely talk about gamut just because it's such an important thing to cover.
Great. I'm going to hop off and turn it over to Marissa. But like I said, if folks have questions at any time, feel free to raise your hand or post them in the chat. Also, if you have any resources or tips you'd like to share with the group, that we would certainly welcome that. And if you don't mind, we're always interested in seeing where people are watching from. So tell us where you're at in the chat while Marissa gets started.
Yeah. All right, we'll just start with the screen share, okay? You should be able to see that. You're gonna see what I'm gonna do here in a second. But first, I'm gonna introduce myself. My name is Marissa, and I'm a colorist. I work in Portland, Oregon. I broke into coloring by going to conventions, often a thing of the past, and just showing my portfolio around regularly and taking feedback, and then applying everything I learned each time and just grinding until I improved. While I was beginning to break in, I worked as a barista, a finisher in a furniture shop, and a flatter. So, and I have a background in fine arts. I was trained in painting. So you'll find a lot of my approach personally is from having a background in painting. Because I think in general, a lot of the basic questions of art tend to have similarly formed questions and similarly formed answers, but it needs to be sort of tailored to exactly what you're doing. But there's a lot of crossover of what makes a good or elegant solution to a design problem, to a storytelling problem, or to a painting problem. So I will be emphasizing sort of teaching you how to think about that. So first of all, I want to explain to you what a colorist does. If you've ever read a comic book, you know that there's the line art, and that is the picture that's drawn with the ink. And then there's the coloring, okay? And the coloring is basically the stage lighting of the comic. And sometimes it can even work as the inking. It organizes the information, it shows you where your eye goes, it sets the mood. And this can be, of course, a very challenging thing to visualize if you're only ever seeing the finished product, right? Like, it's hard to imagine what other choices the colorist could have made because it seems, you know, so natural. And so the way I'm going to illustrate this to you is I want you to think of the show Married with Children, which maybe a lot of you have seen. It's lit very similarly to any standard sitcom, right? You have the 3 lighting set, so you're getting a nice even light, and everything's very clear, pretty flat, nothing changes, nothing's dramatic, because the emphasis is on the jokes and the sort of neutrality of the setting. But if we wanted to very easily change the tone of this, what we would do is we would light it like the movie Mandy. Suddenly, this is not like, this isn't a simple sitcom anymore. Like, this is something much more ominous, something much more dynamic. And this is the kind of choices that a colorist makes when they look at the line art. They have to interpret a few things. What is the story doing? What is the line art doing? And what is the ultimate goal they need to accomplish? And with those things in mind, for the future, we're going to go over something very basic. All right, so even though the concept of color has been around for ages, the ways of organizing how we think about color and what color theory is has, like many processes, been very recent. This is one of the most recent, or one of the earliest color wheels. And you can see this color wheel is organized by chroma, and this chroma includes a violet that is almost black, which is something that we've now, like the blacks and the whites, we've more broken off into value. And so this was a different way of organizing the value plus the chroma. And then this is a pure chroma organized in 3 different color styles. That's the RGB, the RYB, and the CMYK, okay? Even though RGB, which is red, yellow, blue, and or RYB is red, yellow, blue, and RGB is red, green, blue, they're very similar, but they're like slightly different processes that give you slightly different color ranges, slightly different complementary colors. And then the CMYK is what we use for standard printing now, and that is cyan, magenta, and yellow, with K being key plate or black plate. And so you get a pretty full range of colors, but there's almost no process in existence that's going to give you the full range of colors that you can see with your eye. But the thing is that doesn't matter at all. Our brains are incredible at putting together information. You may be familiar with a palette called a Zorn palette, which is a grayscale palette with just a red and like a ochre yellow added. And with that palette, you can actually get what appears to be a full range of colors with just those 4 actual pigments. because the human brain is just like, it just is very excited to fill in information. And color is very relative. So one of the things that is very important when you're trying to color a comic is you want to plan your palette ahead of time, okay? You want to take into consideration whether it's going to be printed, and that will knock a lot of colors out of gamut. For instance, this is one of the many, many enemies of print. I will show you this color. I am sure you have seen it before. This is like a very neon green. And while you can get specialized pigments to print this color, you will spend a lot of money to print this color. This is another color, this like pure cyan, right? You would think that would print, right? Because one of the colors in CMYK is cyan. But the issue here is that there is a difference between how RGB and CMYK put out light, or how our eye observes them, okay? So we have a question for gamut. Gamut is the range of colors that can be reproduced, okay? So like with the Zorn palette, you can produce a very limited gamut that appears to be the full gamut, but it's actually very small. And because it's so limited, our brain fills in extra information. The RGB, if you look at this illustration, the light is transmissive. So it goes straight into your eyeball. And that's how you get those like just wildly vivid colors, because it's just like shooting that neon right into your eyeball. And the reason you can't get that on something that's reproduced in paper is because the light actually bounces into the pigments, and then whatever waves are left are the ones that bounce back into your eye. So you can imagine that like it will sort of slow down the wavelengths, and that's why you tend not to get very light fast fluorescence, why you tend not to see very many fluorescence outside of digital projection, is because it is actually the light waves needing to slow down. That may be overly technical, and I'm sorry, but basically like because of the way light works, not everything is reproducible in every format. And when you're making a comic or coloring a comic or any kind of print media, you want to be really aware of what can be reproduced and what can't be reproduced. But this will not limit your ability to convey information. Because the thing about color is almost entirely relative. If I'm going to do another quick illustration for you guys. This is another type of color wheel where we have it going less saturated towards the center. But we'll just do a quick illustration. I'm going to go into a grayscale. I am sure a lot of you have seen Optic Illusions before, and they are very fun. But what they do a great job of is illustrating relationships. Okay, so we got a black on gray. Suddenly, this gray is looking a lot lighter, right? And if we inverse it, that gray is looking a lot darker. It's a little thrown off by my dark background. But one thing we can do is we can make that, and that, and sorry, have it. You can see this interior square on the right looks darker than the areas surrounding the white. Wait, yes. And it's just because even though those are the same gray, the relationships they have to the other objects is tricking your eyes. Your eyes and your brain are trying to contextualize the information it has. And so when you are coloring, one of the things you want to think about is like how you're contextualizing the information that's on the page, right? So if you do like every single color on every single costume and render the heck out of it, the thing is the viewer's eye is not going to have any place to rest or to look or be able to process anything. It'll just like slide right off the page because there's no context, there's no space. There's no space for a person's eye to rest. And then let me pull up. Let's see, do I have a good example of a place for eyes to rest? I think we'll maybe just go over into one more technical thing before I start showing you different examples. This is just a good hygiene practice, good file hygiene. There's something called Alias. Hopefully some of you have seen 8-bit video games, 16-bit video games before. This has hard edges. And the thing it does is it makes it very easily selectable. Whoops. So you can see that I just selected that without any stray pixels. Very easy. Everything's like everything's touching up against everything else. Because what happens is even though there would be a K plate, the key plate, the black plate going over this, the plates can still shift. And what you don't want to see is like little white dots underneath there, or you don't want to see like stray pixels. It makes it, if the plate shifts, it really makes it look not good and messy. So this is called AntiAlias, and you really want to check on this. This is this button right here, and they have it in Clip Studio also. But if I remember correctly, the way Clip Studio works is your tool is either Alias or AntiAlias. In Photoshop, you need to click this button. And you can see if I try to change this color, you have all this stray pixels, all this archiving, and it will absolutely be a hassle. So you very much want to pay attention to your aliasing or your anti-aliasing. Okay, we'll close those. Don't save it. Don't save it. And so here is an example of line art. This is by Kyle Latino. This is She Dwarf, and we used it for something we call a color jam many, many years ago. I think we did this in like 2014, 2013, something like that. So what this is this is the line art right here. We'll do a new little layer so I can write on it. And I will zoom into these flats so you can see line art, and then flats, and then together. Obviously, this final page isn't rendered, right? I'm going to show you different versions of it being rendered in a moment. The thing that is really important to note about these flats is notice they are anti-aliased. Notice that even though colors may look similar, the goofball. Colors may look similar, but only one object per color is selected. Okay, so this blue is all the tunic. This blue is all the troll. This magenta is all the beard, etc., etc. Because to effectively render, you need to be able to select these, okay? And you need to be able to select them in a way that won't leave behind those little speckles we saw earlier. And let me pull up what I was talking about before with some of the choices. I should be able to get this to play. And there we go. Okay. So we have a few different artists who chose to render the same piece, or that's what our color jams are. Everybody renders the same piece. And then you can see like how everybody has their own sort of palette. They have their own sort of mood they want to emphasize. There's different styles. There's like hundreds of choices each person can make within this one page. And so if you want to communicate to your artist or to your colorist, like, I want it to look this way, I'm going to give you some concrete ways to do that. So let's start with so this is a page from Ladykiller, and this is what's called flat style, right? The coloring has little to no rendering, and the way this is working is by doing just the way the color selections are sitting next to each other, right? Remember I talked about colors being contextual. This looks dark because it's next to that. But if you put it next to this, it looks both redder and lighter. If you put it like next to this, it looks redder and gray, or it looks redder because it's a similar value, but it doesn't look dark or anything like that. You should be able to get it to do like a more saturated. That's too close in value. Maybe with boop, boop.
Marissa, we have a question about layers, and I just wanted to see if you're going to cover that a little bit later.
I can get into it. What's the question?
Well, the question in the chat is, does each color get its own layer?
I would not do that.
Well, I think maybe can you talk a little bit, not necessarily right now, but I think maybe letting people know how you use layers for the line art versus the flats and the final colors.
I will get into that. I just want to give them language to even talk about things yet. So you can see that this is, it's all very relative. So that's the flat style, and flat style depends the most on relativity, color theory. This is a page from Helheim. This is the cell cut with a little bit of grad. And you can see it's similar approach, but there is a little more rendering happening. So it's less just about the color choices, it's the color choices and where the light is setting up. This is like a soft rendering, full rendering, or airbrush style. And then I will go into, let me get you a fresh page. All right. There's a couple different ways to set things up. And we will do, oh, you said this is recorded, right? I can't show you this then. I'll have to dig up something old.
Nothing X-rated, Marissa.
Oh, it won't be X-rated. It's just, it's not released yet. So I don't want to get in trouble.
Oh, got it.
We'll do this. Okay, cool. Deep, 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 deep. All right. So I'm going to show you one of my more complicated setups to start with. But this is, again, this is absolutely not the way you have to set it up. But the idea is just to convey how things work. There's often colorists will joke about the CMYK versus RGB war. Personally, I'm of the school, like, whatever works, but also it's important to like keep in mind that like the screen can only ever approximate CMYK. So you're really just artificially limiting yourself. And if you need to artificially limit yourself, then great, go for it, do it. That's what works. But if you feel like you can take control of the full range of tools and not need that limit necessarily externally imposed, then yeah, it's fine. So my basic setup is kind of complicated. I know I said basic. All right. So what I do is, and again, this is complex, so I'm sorry. There's definitely simpler ways to do this. Dave McKeag has posted about his 4-layer process. He has his effects layer, line art layer, flats layer, render layer. Okay, so he uses 4, and if I recall correctly, he also works in CMYK. Matt Wilson, similarly, Jordi Belair, similarly. I have an easier time thinking this way. So I have the line art in a mask. The reason I have it this way is because if the line art is anti-alias, although this looks pretty good, this, I think Mike alias this for me. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, if the line art's anti-alias, it's easier to get color holds to work, which is the process of if I wanted to, there we go. All right, so let's say I wanted to make these glasses like look like they're looking through something, right? One thing I could do is color hold that, you know, and take some of the harshness off of that. Oops. Okay, so that's what's called a color hold. And I do it on these sub layers because sometimes some of the effects people request out of me are very complicated. And so I have Photoshop set up this file to start with so that I don't have to mess around on that stuff. And then this is my corrected colors. This is what I get back from the flatter. So you'll be able to see the difference here. Typical things that happen when I get it back from the flatter is even though there's like structured selections, there are things that are maybe a little wrong. I don't know if this one has it or not, but sometimes they'll get parts of bodies confused, or they'll like miss out on objects. Like you can see I added some details to her jacket there. I think maybe something in the corner where it's messed up. Did this so long ago, I don't remember. But yeah, so that's what I get back from the flatter. So I go through and I make one of these, which again, you don't have to do this. I found this helpful for me making sure that all the parts of the flats are there. And I do this so that I can do some very like delicate touches without having to select the same object a whole bunch of times, especially with sometimes when the flats are messed up, the flat itself is messed up. So if you select it, you undo your previous work. Is there another question?
Yeah, we have people are asking some questions about the layers. Could you maybe just walk through the layers that you have set up here and the purpose of each one, how you're using it?
Okay, yeah, I guess I moved too fast. Okay, so this is the flats. This is what I pay somebody to do. This layer is called flats. That has to be alias. It is something I pay somebody to do. And this is what it looks like without the line arts. And then once I get this back, I have Photoshop set up the file with this panels copy started. And then from the panels copy, I make this separations. These, again, they are not the actual rendering colors. They're just something for me to select. And I make these invisible, and then I color correct. This is my actual color corrected background layer. Okay, is that clear? Or are we still confused on what layers are? Did you guys want Dave McKegg's 4 layers again? Or?
We have one person who specifically wanted to know what the effects layer is. And if folks still have questions about the layers, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question yourself.
Okay. So once these are invisible and locked up, then I go through, and usually there'll be some like special, some more detailing work that needs to happen to the characters that are across the whole comic. Like this dog has a special pattern that has to go on the dog every single time. Sometimes people will get like a little rouge. Yes, the flats are just a technical layer that I have a technician do that is just for selection. It has zero relationship to any actual colors that are going to be on the page. Okay, and then on this one, I do like some like subtle lighting, and then I have my actual rendering layers in here, and then this is my special effects setup. I have it in a folder up top, and this is set up so that I can have the Photoshop run it as a batch action, and I don't have to flatten everything by hand each time. And I apologize, some of the terms are like ridiculous, where flattening and flattening are 2 different things. Flattening is a process in Photoshop where it compresses or like merges all the files into one thing, and then you trap and back the line art. Okay, it's a little technical jargon, I'm sorry. So my effects layer is in a folder, so that what I can do is, if let's say I wanted this light to shine, what I would do is I would go on top of the line art, because it's you want to blow out the line art a little bit with some of the effects. And then maybe like a gradient, right? And so set to normal, it doesn't look like anything. And then you can do like a hard light, and then it looks like something. And then I have it in a folder, so that what I can do personally, this is the way I like to do it, is build it up a little bit. We're not going to do that's a little too much. So let's say for some reason there was a specific reason that light needed to be blowing out that scene. That's how you would do it. And then if you want it to really look like it is working, what you would have happen is you would have the light having an actual effect on the person in the panel. Okay. But obviously that's not the thing we wanted for the scene, so we didn't do it. All right. And again, this is like one way of setting it up. Other people use 4 layers. I use this complex system because it's easier for edits rather than doing everything on one layer. I would not do everything on its own layer because the file gets pretty big. And if you are doing what I think some people are talking about, which is having each one of these like, having each one of these on their own separate layer. to render with clipping masks, this file gets like, it just gets out of control if you're doing this. If you don't know what a clipping mask is, it's this. So you can do, oh, what are we doing? Oh, that's right, because it's underneath everything. Goofball. Yeah, like a clipping mask can get overly complex. And you do not want that. Oh, it's because I locked it. There we go. Nope. I have done something wrong. Oh, set to 0. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so you would be like rendering with a clipping mask on this, and then it doesn't go off the edge. The issue with that is that your file does get huge, especially if you're doing like a crowd scene or anything like that. Oh, shucks. I didn't mean to say that.
I have a question. Can I ask a question?
Of course.
And someone in the chat has a related question. So, so I'm not great with layer masks. Having the line art as a layer mask, does it also make it easier to do the flats? Like, can you use because with the mask, everything you can't draw on the line art, right? Because it's masked out and you can only draw on the reversed out part.
You can draw on the line. Look, wait, when you say you can't draw on the line art, rephrase, please.
Well, this is related. So someone asked in the chat, it looks like you have the whole panel selected, but when you applied a light color, it only went on the shirt. Is that because of the mask, or are you just experienced?
No, it only went on the shirt because I was using a clipping mask, which is different from this kind of mask. I know this is, how do I say this? There are a lot of technical tricks that you can use. But let me find, I should have actually a Dave McKeag file here that occurs to me that I have, and I should be able to actually pull up a much easier setup for you guys. Oh, here we go. Great. There we go. Okay, so this is Dave McKeag's system, and you can see his might be a little small, but he does the line art also with a mask, but on one layer, and then he does the color corrected flats and then the rendering flats, and it's the same system I'm using, except it's all just on 3 layers instead of across a bunch of layers. And let me see if I can find a live file so that I can show you. Is there another question about how to use the mask? Because maybe that'll help me think about how to say it more clearly.
Well, I'm just curious why why you do it that way, why you have the line art as a mask. I don't know if other people are curious about that though, because I've mostly only seen it. I don't know that much about masks, and so when I do it, on those rare occasions, and when Paul does it, we have the line art just as its own layer, and we do have a flatter who probably does some things to it that we don't understand.
Well, when I send it to the flatter, it's actually, oh, I can probably actually, maybe I can pull up one of Paul's things.
Other people are saying they are curious, and one person would like to know how to create a clipping mask.
Okay. Let me guess. Just, all right. Here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna bite the bullet, and I'm gonna take you through step by step on a live file, because I think that might be the easiest way to do this.
Thanks for rolling with that.
If I get in trouble with DC, it'll be fine.
We can embargo it if we need to until publication date.
We'll see. I'll ask him once. I'll ask him. It's probably fine, but I just didn't ask them ahead of time because I wasn't planning on doing this way. Sorry.
Okay, everyone here has to sign an NDA now.
Yeah. Let's do, okay. So this is going to be, close out a ton of windows here. No. 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 This is why I also use a supercomputer, because this stuff, like I usually have a ton of windows open at once. All right. No. Okay. We're going to take this. All right. So now you're going to see exactly what I see when I get back from the flatters. Okay. It is just this. There isn't the line art. The line art, they put, the flatters I use, it doesn't matter how I send them the line art because they put it in this alpha channel. Okay. And the reason I use the mask as opposed to putting it on a transparent layer with multiply is because when it's anti-alias like this, it always messes up my automated backing and trapping, because the speed and scale at which I have to do coloring, if I wouldn't meet my deadlines if I had to do everything by hand. So there's a lot of automation involved, which you're now going to see. So these are my actions. This is, again, just like good hygiene. And I use my flatting prep action, hit play.
And those are actions you recorded, right? For
Yeah.
things that you do frequently.
Yeah, I made these, and like everybody's going to have slightly different sets because every colorist colors slightly differently. And then what I usually do is I take these panels, this panels layer, and I divide this up so that I can easily select a panel, because sometimes for contrast, what I would want, and I'm going to do this fast. Sometimes what I would want is like, I'd be thinking of, let's see, I'll walk you exactly through the process. This is a night scene, but I am going to need these two panels to stand out. And let's see, the opposite of blue for a night scene would be yellow, but that doesn't really make any sense at night. So I can push the night scene more green, which would give us red, which could work. Okay. So I would have these, I would do all my prep and I'd be able to just grab these and like make them maybe like a gray red. And then this is like a greenish gray night. Okay. And you can see how there's already clarity because I'm trying to think in contrast. And then we do want the moon to have a certain level of lightness. Oops. I'm doing this the not exactly 4-level way because just for speed. We want the moon to be lighter, so we use this hue saturation. And as you can see, when my systems are off, I get very confused about what I'm doing. All right. Okay. When things recede into darkness, they have lower contrast. And when they are in the foreground, they have more contrast. Shadows tend to be warmer at night. This is literally my coloring process, where I do this silently in my head, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing. But because I am helping you all, I'm going to say it out loud. So that if you saw that turn really yellow, yellow wouldn't exist that much at night. or in this circumstance where we want it a little more natural, it's not a wise choice to have that bright of a yellow because it wouldn't read as natural. It would read as more like, well, it wouldn't read as night. It wouldn't read as a natural night. So we're just gonna take it to a more sort of warm gray, which will read as a more blue next to that color. And then we definitely don't want the skin tone like that. Okay, we're just roughing stuff in. And then we went, okay, so here's where we have a little issue, right? We should lose contrast at night, but the way this has been designed is that it looks like what the artist wants us to do is, for storytelling purposes, is to have this darker and that lighter. My guess is, and this is where I'd start pulling up some reference to look at night scenes. We can probably cheat this. Yeah, we can probably cheat this with like some moonlight. So we would go in and make nicer rendering, because what I would do is, if I were using my multi-layer setup, I would set up, yeah, I'll show you. You'll see why I do this in a second. Okay, so that's exactly the color I chose for my moonlight. And then I will, screen is probably too bright. Let's see if that's bright enough. It might not be. Dang, okay. So what we need to do is a screen. And okay. So then this is in a mask. So this is just a solid color in a mask. And the reason I work in masks is because I can do these cheats like this, where let's say I have that whole thing rendered. I can use my levels. To make it a brighter highlight universally or a darker highlight universally. And then if there's actually more information in there, it sort of adjusts it evenly. And again, this is one way of working. There are thousands of ways to accomplish the same thing. But the main goal is to have a palette that works, to have it reproducible by print, and to have it support the line art. Okay. And then my guess is there would be a fire in the village, but also it'll help draw like the eye. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna grab a nice warm. And the nice thing about this is by putting this warm in there, we'll actually be more able to make that other gray look more gray by comparison, instead of make it look as yellow as it looks right now, which is not what we want. And then the reason I do it is that solid color like that is so that I can adjust this and be like, okay, that's what we want. And then we go back in here. So I have designed this system. It's very similar to the one that Tamara Bonvillain uses. And the purpose of these is so that you can make small adjustments very quickly. Okay. So I could probably knock back this a little more gray even. Take it down. There we go. All right. And then, yeah, I would be very focused and tearing through this at this point, which I'm not going to do now. So I mentioned that it needs to be print ready. We talked a lot about gamuts. I'm going to take you through a page that is done so you can see how it looks when it is done. I recently lost a hard drive, so everything's not where I usually have it. So that's the only thing slowing me down. Back up your work. Don't use Seagate external drives. Okay, here we go. Oh, and I'll pull up this one actually because it has the layers effects since we were asking about that.
You don't need to answer this now, but we have a question about kind of scheduling. So maybe after this, if you could speak to that.
Yeah, for sure. So
and I recommend glyph drives. I went through a whole hunt because of exactly that issue and like not wanting to lose files due to external hard drive failure.
Yes, yeah, and I've heard Backblaze is good. So I started setting that up, but then got crushed by deadlines. Okay, so here is my special effects layer. See, it's in my folder named special effects. You can see it's a whole bunch of layers. That's what it looks like without the special effects. That's what it looks like with the special effects. Oh, with. And then even like to add a little bit of extra light, I went in and I drew those white outlines to just like really, really blast out the light. Okay. And then these two pages are going to use simple contrast, right? Yellow versus blue, with little red highlights. This is like a purpley blue versus orange and red. So I work in RGB. You don't have to, you can work in CMYK. This gets a little easier if you do work in CMYK, but it might take long. The other parts of this, the rendering might take longer. I have my line art in this alpha channel. And then I go to my actions. And I go to flatten and back. So right now, what's the best way to show you this? Okay, right now, all this stuff meets up, hard edges, meets up under the line art, right? There's not really any stray pixels or anything like that. But when you flatten it, the CMYK file, if you don't prepare things correctly, you won't have what's called a back on the line art, which is where you have to go in 3 pixels, 2 or 3 pixels, and then you put a strip of 60, 40, 40 to make a rich black. This is all technical, but I actually have documents for you that will be emailed out that will have very specific followable instructions on that. And
I have a real quick side question. Sorry about backing the blacks, because when I was, well, many years ago, when I was a comic book editor, you had to do that because everything was in print. Is that also necessary for a digital reproduction, or is it only if the work is going to wind up being published on paper?
Hygiene, I would say do it, because using best practices gives you fewer things to fix later, and it gives you fewer things to think about, right? I have heard of people who, I guess, have too much time on their hands or love torturing themselves, one of the other, who will do the files in both. They'll do a custom CMYK and a custom RGB file, and that gives me insane anxiety. Like I don't need to add that workload. So I would say, regardless of if you're doing it digitally or anything like that, you don't want to lose information. So do best practices that will preserve it for the highest quality in the future. You know, like you don't want to be stuck trying to print a 72 DPI JPEG. Probably should have gone over what that means. when what print actually needs is like 400 CMYK. But
you said 60, 40, 40. Is that 60% cyan, 40% yellow, 40% magenta?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
All right, actions. Here we go. And I do this as what's called a batch. And so that the Photoshop does all these pages at once. And then I just go through and double check to make sure everything's okay. So do you see, I'll do two versions of this so you'll be able to see the lost information actually. You see how there's this like gray here? That's the backing. These are all the plates that are going to print. This is basically telling the printer what to do. And the black layer is slightly thicker than that gray layer, right? So that's if the plate shifts a little bit, you still get the rich black without other colors seeping out at the edges, which is not what you want. This just makes it look not blurry. And again, there'll be a packet that I'll link to where you can buy it, and it goes into this very specifically because it is something pretty technical that's tough to teach to 100 people at once. Okay. So if we were to do this as if we were to do this as and this is a quirk of Photoshop, so just keep that in mind. If we were to do this just as a pure black, right? Pure black, what happens is actually this information becomes missing. It becomes missing from the other panels, which also gives you an opportunity to have a very messed up, sloppy printing situation or angry press text, which you don't want. You don't want either of those things. And again, best practices is to have something like actions that sets it up and finishes it for you so that, you know, it's consistent, you know, it's doing what it needs to do. And the thing that can be kind of fussy is when you're reproducing these special effects, sometimes flat, when you crunch it, sometimes the gradient isn't so nice and you just touch it up. Then you probably want to know stuff about paper stock. Do you want to know about paper stock? I do have the backing automated. Yeah. Okay. Most
You're saying yes, talk about paper stock. And I know it makes a huge difference in how the color reproduces.
It does. The paper stock has improved a lot since like the 90s and the 70s, especially. Like the 70s, comics were extremely disposable. So they would have a cheap paper that just sucked up ink. And because of that, that's why you get those like sort of more desaturated colors in older comics. Because even though they were printing with 100% cyan and like Bende dots, which is the pure ink, but it's just in dot form, so it creates the illusion of less color. So even though you would have that full saturation, because the paper absorbs so much ink, it ends up looking dull. So it's very important to understand if you're printing on cheap paper, right, like newsprint, or if you're printing on good paper, which is a lot more common now, card stocks, things like that. Most companies will tell you something called their ink limit, which I will show you. There we go. Okay. So I think DC is still at 280. I need to double check with them. This is what's called an ink limit. It is how much ink the paper will take. Your Photoshop starts with it at 300, but most printers that print comics do not do that. So it's usually somewhere between 240 to 280. And if I can remember everything off the top of my head, I have this all written down because I forget. Dark Horse, I think, is 290. DC's 280. Marvel is 250. And so everybody has different systems. So again, best practices is to get the information, make color setting profiles so that you have it, and whoever you're working with, you can set to the correct profile without having to like double check information, because it's a lot of like stuff to keep in your brain. Most paper is good now. So you can use the swap coded, which is what a lot of the publishers ask you to use. So that means that there's like a layer of sizing on the paper. And sizing, again, for the confusing terms, sizing isn't the size of the paper, it's actually glue. It's like a glue that seals the paper so that the ink sits on top instead of sinks into it, okay? So that's what, when you're seeing coded, it means that the ink is gonna sit on top. If you see uncoated, it means the ink is gonna sink into it, which is different from glossy, which is gonna have the colors be even more vivid and sit even higher on top of the paper and like be glossy. So it's all a lot of information to retain. But again, there will be information on that. Ooh, we're getting close on time. I want to give you some exercises to think about stuff, because the technical information, I'm sure everybody's eyes are absolutely glazed over. Mine aren't, just because I happen to really like the technical stuff, but I appreciate that it's not the most fun in the world to talk about paper grain and paper sizing and all that stuff. All right, some exercises for you lovely people. We're going to go to our correct folder.
I don't think you lost when people are saying they live for the technical stuff.
Oh, they do live for the great. Well, then get into coloring. Oh, whoops. Have it. All right. So there is something you really need to think about when you're coloring, and it is grayscale. Even though you're actually using colors, the way the human eye perceives things is value first, and then temperature, saturation, all that stuff later. So this, thinking about it in grayscale is going to give you the most clarity of your forms. And you want to think about like how to unify forms, how to you know, make things not look tacky. So here is what happens if, you know, you've done it. This is a painting by was it called Grisaille painting by Raphael. So it's just in grayscale, probably lamp black and titanium white. Well, no, probably lead white. Anyway, it's beside the point. You can see there's still like a little temperature difference in it, but like for the most part, it's just grayscale. And then what they would do is they go over and they glaze it. And there's actually like a level of subtlety in how the colors are affected, because it'll look cheesy if you just if you don't do that. And then this is just like a little saturation thing to show you. You really, really do want to control saturation, even though it can be exciting. Like I have this behind me, to have things like look really, really saturated and fun. if you don't keep an eye on the saturation, stuff actually just looks like crazy tacky. So again, we're going to use our hue, saturation, lightness slider, and we can take it down and you can say like, oh, it's still pretty exciting without being out of control. It's maybe getting too subdued there, or you can just do it in a controlled manner, which is what I advocate for, thinking about what you're doing. So here is an exercise for how to break things down into values. Pick a piece of art you like, and then do your best with this piece of art to break it into 2 values. I would recommend against breaking it into just black and white because it can get a little confusing in your brain. But try to break it into 2 values first. And you'll see in classical paintings, one of the things that happens a lot is that they'll put the darker value next to the lighter value to help give it a little more pop. And you can see it happens right at the shoulder break here where the dress is. This will also help you sort of like learn to simplify and pick clear shapes out, which is another thing you really want to be able to do. And then you can move up to like 3 or 4 values after you've done the 2 values. And then it helps, again, figure out how to create focus and how to create structure. Another good thing you really want to do is take something like this. And then try to organize the colors in it. And you can do this with a film still. You can do this with a painting. You can do this with a what's the word? With a comic you like. Oh boy, talking too long. And you'll be able to see like, oh, that's actually, you'll be able to see like sometimes there's like little darker tones than you would expect. And then just try to organize it into groupings of like cold and warm on the scale plus value. And then that will help you see how things sort of are put together, right? So like this color next to that color, it's pretty exciting, but it doesn't look as organized as that color next to this color moving into that color. You see how it looks like a little more organized. And that's one of the things I was talking about first that helps your eye feel contained and like have places to rest so that you're not looking at like a million colors at once. Here, I'll show you another good example. This is so this is how this is organized. I didn't paint this. This is oh God, I feel so bad. He's just departed and we adore him, but my brain is not accessing information. But you can see how this has a warm, cool structure. And if I recall correctly, he did work in the 4-layer structure. So he just has the line art, the flats, the rendering, and any effects on top. And so you can see how this has the warm, cool. We have values grouped pretty tightly to give it structure and emphasis. One thing you'll be able to see is that, and one of the things he really is so amazing at is that he picks out the structure of the drawing. He's able to pick out the planes and group things in a way that makes aesthetic sense. So we have, if we were just to divide this into our 2 values, it would be divided like that. So you have two structures, and that just helps clarify. Justin Ponzer, geez. This is by dearly departed Justin Ponzer, and he was really one of the greats. Definitely worth studying his work. And you can see he gets a ton of value and structure in here with a surprisingly limited palette. Shall we move into some questions?
Do we have, I'll give people a chance to, if you have any additional questions that you want to ask Marissa live on Zoom, this is a great time. We did have, sorry, somebody just jumped in the waiting room. We do have somebody who was sort of, you know, saying that they're not sure to how to make the right color choices, that if they're more confident in their line art than they are with coloring. Do you have any good resources that you can suggest for people to, I don't know, learn about color theory or how to make those choices and feel more confident about it?
And I'm going to make a note about the scheduling too, because there was a question about scheduling.
Oh yes, I'll go.
I absolutely live for. I love the project management part of this. And again, it may not be for everyone, so keep that in mind. With making good choices, like almost anything else in life, it is experience. So try not to get too hung up on making bad choices. Just make choices and then sit there and think about what worked for you, what didn't work for you. Okay, that is, to put it the most simply. And I know that doesn't sound helpful, so I'm actually going to give you some more exercises that will help you learn to study. And then in the resources book I'm going to send, we have books by James Gurney. I have Foundations of Color. I have the Betty Edwards color book, the Painting with Light. We have even Problem Solving for Painters, which is one of my favorite books, because there's no good way for me to tell you, like, make good choices. You have to make a bunch of bad choices and figure out what didn't work for you to make some good choices. So let me give you some keys for troubleshooting your bad choices. Did you have another question?
Well, just on that same topic, it was really interesting to watch you kind of narrating your thought process while you were coloring that night scene and talking about how the different values would work in the distance versus the foreground, and thinking about complementary colors and colors that, you know, are opposites, but, you know, some of those might not work in a night setting. So that really helped me, you know, to kind of wrap my head around the kinds of things you're thinking about while you're making those choices.
Yeah, and actually I have there's a podcast I have listed in there that will, in the resources, that's actually really good for he sort of talks how to get inspiration and how to work off of your own choices. But here is a basic here and with each one of these, from Problem Solving for Painters, one of my absolutely favorite books that I could not recommend enough. For each one of these, it's a two-part question where you can say, like, does it need X or does it need Y? So it'll be like, can you increase the value range in the art? Or do you need to decrease the value range in the art, right? So I'm sure sometimes we've seen that, I don't want to say that anybody's style is wrong, but sometimes there are people who like to put every value on the page and then everything has the same weight, right? Because everything's hitting the highest high points and the lowest low points, and that's too much value range. Historically, our eyes prefer to have some sort of natural grouping of value ranges. So this is a quick study I like to do. Do like, so can the value range be increased here? I would say absolutely, yes. That's not, unless we're doing a very specific modern thing, we can convey more information by increasing the value range here. So, and I know I have a lot of Photoshop tricks. It's just because I have a lot of Photoshop tricks. All right, we've increased the value range. Okay, that's great. We've increased the value range. Is this giving us all the information we need? I think we can do just a little bit more value range here to give us just a little more information. And now we have a clear object because we've increased the value range, right? Okay, you have increased the value range. Is there somewhere else you can help create focus by adding more detail or more visual contrast? We already have really good visual contrast here with the white versus black, but we can also add temperature contrast. So we'll do like that and that. Ooh, not that. That. Okay. Making good color choices. You heard me make a sound. That has to do with my taste and my preference for colors. You're gonna have to develop that by looking at things and taking note of like what you prefer, what you dislike. And you have to sort of train yourself to be able to analyze that, and then you can use that to make your own voice and make your own decisions.
They clarified that they were also asking about what coloring style to use. And I think that depends, you know, tell me if you disagree, but I think that depends a lot on the art style and what you want the finished art to look like. So for the series that my husband and I are working on right now, the line art has a very clean, style, and it's set in a historical environment that has a lot of color in it. And so the coloring is both very vivid and saturated, and we're using what you described as cell cuts. So not a lot of blending. Instead, there's, you know, like different hues and shades that are just cuts, basically.
Yeah, there's going to be a couple things that are going to inform your choices in that. One, your thought process is very fundamental to that. The way you think about objects, the way you make aesthetic decisions is what's going to develop how you color. Secondly, the line art is going to tell you how it wants to be colored. Because, so imagine a Mike Mignola piece. Now imagine that with a bunch of airbrushing all over it. Not great, really distracts from the design, right? So you have to pay attention to what's on the page. So you won't, honestly, there is no harm in talking to your line artist and being like, hey, do you have anything you like to see with your art? Is there any way you color yourself? Are there artists that you look at that you enjoy? And then as a colorist, you can go look at those things. And then the story is the other thing that will inform it, right? So if stuff's taking place a lot of misty night, you may need to think about how you can integrate that sort of atmosphere into your own rendering style. Does that make sense?
If you don't mind taking a couple more questions, I wanted to go back to the one about scheduling, because I think it's a good kind of basic pro question. And then we had a couple others that maybe we can get through in the last couple of minutes. So the scheduling question was, I'm going to preface this by saying that as a former comic book editor, I know that colorists often get leaned on really hard in the schedule because they are the last in the process when it's done digitally, and especially when it's done digitally. So sometimes they're asked to turn stuff out faster than is really would otherwise be necessary. But the question, How fast are you usually required to turn out complete pages? And how many do you have an average number of hours that you spend on each page?
This is always a kind of complicated question, but again, it depends on you. My average is not going to be your average. Your speed will increase over time as you get more experience, as you recognize more art styles. You have to think about it less. As you experience more things, you're like, this is the way that works, this is the way that doesn't work. So you get faster the more you do it, right? As with anything else, you build better muscle memory. So one of the most important things you can do is track how long it takes you to do your work. So this is my love. This is my beautiful life. This is my Hobonichi planner. I have my schedule that's ideal here in my monthly situation. This is where I put in the deadlines that are supposed to happen. Then from there, you saw the little tapes. Not all the tapes were in there because there was some flexibility. But from there, I count backwards from the day it's supposed to be due. I give myself Sundays off. Try to give myself Sundays off. I count backwards how many days I think it's going to take to issue. So for instance, the Harley Quinn, because it has so much detail, so much extra added stuff, Max and I haven't quite hit our groove yet because we're just starting working out together. An issue actually takes me maybe 8 or 10 days to do. So I count backwards 10 days from when it's due. And then that's my absolutely have to start by date. I do not wait until that date to start it. I send everything I can to the flatters as soon as I get it. I'm doing prep work around other jobs, but that is my absolutely to the wire. Stuff has to start. And that day is a protected day. That taped out area is a protected area where I don't schedule any other deadlines over it. And I do that with everything. So
and how many pages? How many story pages are in a DC comic now? 20?
20 to 22, yeah. Amy and I have hit a little bit more of a stride. So most of the time, her book will take me 5 days, unless there's something wild that needs to happen. So I count 5 days back, make sure to work in time off. Val and I have hit our stride, so those can take 4 or 5 days to do. I have classes I teach, so I block those off. And again, I try not to wait until the last minute to do anything, because shit goes wrong, man. It just does. This week.
Is a workday 8 hours? In the chat, is a workday 8 hours, or is it just the amount of work, the time needed for the amount of work you want to complete?
When I'm very lucky, work days are 8 hours. That's the ideal. Work hours, 8 hours, Sundays off. But they tend to be, I want to put this diplomatically, because things happen, and because there are multiple lives involved in every comic, things often happen in a crunch, and I don't get my full allotted time for a book. So what I will end up having to do is very long hours to meet the deadline, or something could go wrong, Wacom decides that it doesn't want to work that day. So I lose a day where I'm just troubleshooting my tablet. And so I have to work longer hours because of that.
And those kinds of deadlines are particularly intense in periodical comics, like serialized monthly comics. So if you're doing a graphic novel, you're still going to have a deadline, and it's going to be a hard deadline, but it's a much longer project. And so instead of doing it in these intense chunks, you're going to have to spread it out over a longer period of time.
Yeah. And again, take note of how long it takes you to do something. I add, for a shorter book, I add maybe like 15% time as a padding per page. So like if a page takes me 2 hours, I'm bad at math, so I add 30 minutes because I don't know what I'm doing. And then I schedule like that amount of hours. So that's if something goes wrong. My hard drive melts. Wacom doesn't want to cooperate. There's like a home emergency, because I've worked in that time where there's room for something to go wrong, and I'm not. It's gonna set me back, but it's not gonna destroy my life. You know what I'm saying? And then one of the super important things to do when you're scheduling stuff is stay in communication with your team. Like if you fall behind, it's okay. It happens. It's just comics. It's not life or death. But it's super important to let everybody know that you're falling behind, and that something is happening. Because the worst thing that can happen is for you to disappear and nobody knows if you need help, if they need to replace you, if you quit the job. Like it can be scary to be like, oh, I fucked up. But I promise it's super low key. Like I said, my hard drive melted last week and I was having a little bit of hard time catching up because it was slower to get my files back. And so I just let my editors know my hard drive melted. I messed up. I'm sorry. That was my mistake. And I kept them abreast of what was happening with the other projects so that I could be like, it is likely I will get it done by this day. And the reason I could also predict that is because I was keeping track of how many hours it takes to do a page.
I once had, when I was an editor, I once had an artist tell me that they had this huge revelation, which was that editors just wanted to know what was going on. And I was like, yes, that's right.
It's fine. I swear it's fine. Editors are like super chill. Colorists are super chill. Just communicate. It's okay.
So I don't want to keep you long. We just have one question about software that I think might be helpful to address quickly, and then I think we can let everyone go. So you were demonstrating in Photoshop, and I know that's a program that a lot of artists use and a lot of people use for coloring. There are other options. Clip Studio Paint is one of them. We've had two questions in the chat. One was somebody asking if this tutorial, if any of these techniques translate to Affinity Photo, which I'm not really familiar with. And then someone else asked, why do you use Photoshop rather than a different program like Clip Studio?
Yeah. So all that pre-press stuff I was talking about, Clip Studio doesn't have it. So because I value my pre-production team and I love them, I send them cakes every year because I love them. They have very hard jobs. As hard as my job is, theirs is so much harder. So I am doing my best to make sure my pre-press techs are not stressed out. Supposedly, they're saying that Clip Studio can export CMYK now, but it doesn't do, last I checked, this could be outdated information. Last I checked, it doesn't do ink limits. It doesn't do key plate control. It doesn't do it just doesn't do a lot of the pre-press stuff I need it to do. So then a lot of people I know work in, what's that iPad app called? Procreate? Oh yeah, Procreate. I have heard of people working in Procreate. It's fine. Same with Clip Studio. There's no pre-press stuff. So you're gonna have to pull it into Photoshop anyway. If if that works for you, that's fine. It just, I'm tired. I don't want to be messing around with different programs. So I do
know there's a comic book artist who teaches in Portland who occasionally offers online classes in Clip Studio Paint. And some people use that just because it's less expensive and not everybody wants to shell out for the Adobe Cloud software. But yeah, I think those are all good reasons to use Adobe. And if anybody's interested, Jonathan Hill is the teacher who occasionally offers online classes in Clip Studio Paint. One person asked what kind of work delays are common for serial monthlies. God, anything, they're usually scheduled so tightly that anything could knock them off. Like if the penciler is late for any reason, or if there's a separate inker and they're late for any reason, the writer could be late. The writing is usually one of the first things that has to happen. So that throws everything else off schedule. It's kind of like an assembly line process, the way a lot of those comics are produced. So if something falls behind at any stage in that process, it impacts the whole schedule.
Yeah, if somebody changes their mind about something, that also has a huge effect. And look, people have real lives. Art is hard. Drawing is hard. And the monthly deadline is bananas. It's like super duper fast for the amount of backgrounds people are expected to do. It's like crazy fast, and anything can throw a line artist off because they are real human beings who exist with real lives, you know, like it's how it is. And this industry is optimized for perfect circumstances, let's put it that way, which is not the way real life always is.
Yeah, and that's very specific to ongoing monthly comic books. There are also limited series that might come out monthly, but they're only 4 or 6 issues or whatever. There are graphic novels, like we were talking about earlier, that have a higher page count and a much longer production schedule. So serial monthlies are a way to have more consistent income if you can get work for hire. But they're also like, there's a deadline every month, and often multiple deadlines every month.
Yeah, I work on 4 to 8 books a month.
And then one last question, is flatting a good line of work to start with to get experience in production workflow? You
will learn so much. It is a very, very hard thing to do, but you will learn a ton. I think I saw a question about where people can find line art. I am going to include Nick Filardi's information in the packet. And Nick has a YouTube channel and also a Discord channel where he has line art for people to practice flatting on. He does portfolio reviews. There's good community support in his Discord. And there is access to line art. And then there's the various color shams on Twitter, which will also give you access to line art. Yeah.
And we will, hey Marissa, you want to stop sharing your screen? I love this cube, but let's sign off without the cube. There we go. So we will send that out by email with more information to everyone who registered. So everyone who's on will get it, and if people registered but did not attend, they will still get it. And I think we're going to wrap up. We've run a little bit over. I want to thank everyone so much. And I will give you all a chance, if you want to, you can download the chat to save some of that information. And we did record this, and we will be posting it on the Siren Nation YouTube channel. And I put our website is sirennation.org, and you can find all our social links on there. And Marissa, I want to say thank you so much for lending your expertise and your experience. It was really interesting watching you think through and talk about your process while you were doing it. Thanks for doing that.
Oh yeah, it didn't quite go the way my notes were predicting, but I hope people got information that was useful.
Well, everybody's saying thank you. They really enjoyed it. I think people got a lot out of it. So I'll give you all a minute to download the chat. And thank you so much from me and Marissa and Siren Nation.
Bye.